Hello and welcome to This is the Greatest Song I've Ever Heard in My Entire Life. I'm Scott Interrante, and today we are joined by senior writer at Rolling Stone, Brittany Spanos. Brittany, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So this is a podcast about the music we love and why we love it. And I always like to start by asking people, way back at the beginning that you could remember, is there a specific song or artist or experience that you have that made you first take notice of music or fall in love with music?
Yeah, I think there are kind of two really pivotal, genres that really stick out in my memory of me forming my own taste, because I grew up with people who had really intense fandoms. Like my grandpa loved Elvis, and my mom was a huge Prince and Alanis Morissette fan. And those are her top two. And
Nice.
My grandma loved Motown, and my dad was a metalhead. So I had very different. My dad's a huge, only owns Metallica shirts. It's everyone in my family was a huge stan of stuff before I even knew what the word stan was.
Yeah.
And I think my taste started to evolve in a way where I remember most being drawn to novelty 60s songs, kind of Purple People Eater or The Girl at the Laundromat. I loved the Golden Oldies station so much. And I think it was just because it was fun. It was silly. It wasn't even necessarily children's music all the time. It was just comedy. And I, listening to those songs now, they're still really good to me. They're just well-structured pop songs. They're just really fun and they don't take themselves seriously, which is what I often look for in music. And then it was boy bands. It was NSYNC was the first. NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, mostly NSYNC though, were kind of the first artists that I really was obsessed, became a huge fan of. So, and I was just drawn to the, it was because they were hot. And I was 7 and I was,
Right.
It was very simple. And yeah, I think I liked kind of the really fun upbeat songs. I hated NSYNC ballads. I wanted to dance, on the bye bye byes and all that kind of stuff. So that was really pivotal for me.
Well, that's really interesting. So many people have stories about their parents getting them into music. And obviously you were saying your parents and your whole extended family all have these deep connections with particular artists or genres themselves. Were they trying to get you into that stuff when you were a kid?
To some degree, it wasn't really that difficult though. I think there was, obviously a period, especially when I was getting really into kind of Radio Disney boy band stuff where I was I don't want to listen to Alanis Morissette. All she does is scream. And then it was by the time I was 10, I was oh, all she does is scream. That's all I want to listen to.
Right.
So, it's it was very easy for me to get into that stuff. The music that my grandparents like Motown girl groups that my grandma really liked, and the Elvis and kind of 50s, 60s early rock and roll that my grandpa loved, I was drawn to that very quickly. And I think it's also kind of it was easier for me to like what my grandparents liked than what my parents directly liked.
Yeah,
so
totally.
By the time I was in middle school, I was ready to listen, got really into metal and hard rock and really loved, me and my dad loved System of a Down. So we both listened to that a lot, and listening to Alanis and Tori Amos, and also my mom grew up on a lot of 80s pop, so Michael Jackson, Prince. So it's very easy then for me to get into it. And I think I had because I was such a music nerd from an early age, I think my sort of rebellion phase did not last long of being my parents like that. Gross. I was oh, my parents like that. That's kind of cool. And I want to know everything about Nirvana, and please tell me everything.
Well, they were listening to cool stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, even when you were embracing the stuff that they were listening to and that they were fans of, were you conscious to keep certain things for yourself that really felt like stuff that you listened to that you can have that same kind of connection with that they have that's sort of separate from them?
Oh yeah. I'm an only child, so I have deep only child syndrome where I'm this is mine, and I don't share. It was both easy and sometimes my family tried so hard to be okay, Brittany's listening to Linkin Park. Let's keep a Linkin Park CD in the car. And Linkin Park is my band. This is what I listen to when I'm feeling angsty, even though I had nothing to be angsty about because I lived a very nice life. And so it's just a lot of that sometimes. But that also didn't last very long. I was excited when my family got into stuff. Nirvana was my favorite band. And my grandma got really into Nirvana and stuff because I like Nirvana. And so she, her Facebook profile picture was the Nirvana smiley face because that was my first tattoo. So it was a lot of stuff like that. Like they got really into that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's so cool that your whole family is so passionate about music. Did you go to a lot of concerts with them when you were sort of getting into all of this stuff?
So my first 2 concerts were NSYNC, and they were both my dad, and he did not get it, but he brought me to it. And so we had a nice time. And then so I was about 7 to 9 when I went to those NSYNC concerts. And I didn't go to any more concerts until I was a freshman in high school, and I went to Ozfest. And so that was the next time I went to a concert, was that year that like Ozfest was free. And so I went to that and saw like Guar and like Ozzy, and it was like very silly. And then I did Lollapalooza a lot because I grew up in Chicago. So Lollapalooza falls around my birthday every year. And so that was like a big thing where I would get to go to Lollapalooza annually. And that was really nice. But I went to a lot of concerts in high school, a lot of Scene Kid shows, a lot of like big rock shows. I was really, really into rock music. I still am, but like I was like very much like a classic rock nerd. So I soaked all that up. And most similar with my dad. My dad was much more of the concert goer.
Yeah. Was there a point where you started thinking that this is, what you wanted to do with your career? And was there a specific like reason or moment for that? Or was it kind of a gradual thing?
I knew I wanted to be a music journalist when I was like in 7th grade. And I would say that it was because I spent my years loving NSYNC, being really obsessed with like learning everything I could about them. And then I didn't lose that quality about anything that I liked.
Yeah.
Where I was like, I got really into Green Day. And so I had like books on Green Day. I bought every magazine of Green Day. I need to know every single thing I could about Billie Joe Armstrong and about like the band and where they came from. And I need to listen to every band they listened to. And the same thing with Nirvana. Like, I was like, I need to know everything. Like I had like the Kurt Cobain journals, and I had like, every biography about him. And I would just spend hours. Like I remember I got Netflix when I was 11 because I wanted to watch like a weird deep cut, like Kurt Cobain documentary that I couldn't find at Blockbuster. Like I was real obsessive. I'm a huge nerd. I liked history. And so I knew very early that I loved like music history and all of that. So it clicked when I was 12 that was a job. So that was a very exciting moment.
I wonder too if, like you said, you didn't have siblings. Were you finding like internet spaces to like share this fandom? Were you on message boards, I guess at that time, in MySpace in the early days?
A little bit. I was a little wary of social, like my mom was very protective. And so I think like this was like peak To Catch a Predator era. So they were very like, my MySpace was a secret. Like I did not tell my mom I had a MySpace for a couple of years. And so I was very careful on it because I was like, well, my mom doesn't know. And then what if I got murdered? And then that would be really embarrassing.
Right. Yeah. So embarrassing to get murdered.
I know. So I was like, oh, can't really mess this up. I was on grunge forums for a little bit. Mm-hmm. I read a lot of like weird blogs and stuff. I didn't participate too much. Like I was mostly like a reader and observer than I was like a participant in them. So I wasn't like posting actively in it. And that's how I found like a lot of the weird like Kurt Cobain documentaries and strange articles. Right. And I was like in weird forums. Like I probably also shouldn't have been reading those, but like it turned out all right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess, fast forwarding to now, obviously you're a professional music journalist. You are consuming a lot of music all the time for your job. Are you able to, keep that balance of still being a fan of things while also having to, do this as your job?
Yeah. I mean, I think like being a fan is a secret weapon in a lot of ways. I think it allows you to see an artist in a very specific way and allows you to get a little bit deeper, even with interviews. Like, I think there are things that sometimes like if I wasn't like a super fan of some artist, like it would take probably forever for me to even know about certain things. It's like having that ingrained kind of obsessive nature of my brain that I have had for a long time. I think I use it as like a skill as opposed to something else. Also, it's important in terms of being a fan. Like it can be a huge hindrance in the idea of sometimes you can have blind spots, and not sometimes, like all the time you can have blind spots. And like, I think balancing the fact that like I can really love something and I can also be critical of an artist. I think I've always been kind of that way though. I think I've always sort of held that bit of like, I like this band a lot, but like, I don't know, like I don't agree with this song that they did, or like I think like this, it's like whatever.
Right.
They also do a lot of rock music, so it was like it was really
yeah.
had to suspend some belief sometimes, but like it was an interesting balance. I think I'm glad that I always kind of had that little bit of like I'm still being critical of people even if I love them. I can still enjoy a lot of things without it getting in the way, without it feeling like work, which is really nice. Like even if I go to a concert and review it, I'm having a good time. Like I'm not, in my notebook, like scribbling the entire time. Like the entire point of going to a concert reviewing it is being a part of the experience. And like, that's really nice.
Yeah.
If I'm doing an interview, I want to go into it excited that I'm talking to this person, excited to dig into it, and like excited to learn more about them and about what they make. So I think that is always going to be a big part of it for me.
Very cool. Well, okay, Brittany, it's time. What is the song that makes you scream, this is the greatest song I've ever heard in my entire life?
The song I've chosen is Ray of Light by Madonna.
Such a great pick. This is our first Madonna appearance on the pod. This comes out in 1998.
Yeah.
Do you remember hearing it for the first time, or just your general impression of when it came out?
I don't really remember the very first time I heard it. Like thinking about like Confessions on a Dance Floor, like when that came out, like I definitely became very obsessed with Madonna around that time, because that was like around, I guess I was like 7th or 8th grade when that album came out. Like Hung Up was huge and Sorry and all that. So I think I became really obsessed with Madonna around then. And I remember getting so deeply immersed in her discography at that point. So, but a big part of why I chose the song is like, this was very hard to choose a song.
Yeah, I apologize.
It was like very difficult because I was just like, I have so many different ones that I have said that about in the last 24 hours alone. And so,
exactly.
it's hard. But, when I think of songs that I kind of turn to when I need to feel anything, like this is it. Like I'm turning on Ray of Light. Like I can listen to a song for like 48 hours straight and I would still ask for more. Like this is a song that's like, like it's a balm and a release and all the things like at once. And has been. So I don't even know when that started, but like I feel like this just is like such like a joyful song to me in so many aspects of my life.
Well, that's interesting. Earlier you were talking about being big into a lot of rock music when you were growing up and grunge and Nirvana and that kind of stuff. And like, I'm just kind of curious about, your journey with genre and how you sort of ended up where you are now too.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've always been really omnivorous. So I think when I got really into harder rock music, it was coming at a time where I was just really generally fascinated by pop culture history and music history. So when you're listening to a ton of 90s rock music, it's hard not to also absorb what's happening in like 90s pop culture generally. I thought everything happening at once was so fascinating.
Right.
And I think that was just kind of how it went. And I think especially for someone like Madonna, I really loved kind of learning about these like really legendary figures in music. So she's such a big part of that. And I think like that was the interest, but with like pop music specifically and considering myself like even like a pop fan, I think it was always there. I definitely had periods where I kind of let the idea of like authenticity as a listener take over. I spent junior high where I was like, I'm really into like rock music and like, this is like, the truest me is like I listen to rock music, which is not untrue. I love listening to rock music. I still listen to a lot, but I think by the time, like when the Jonas Brothers came out, I was like, well, that's false. I was like, we're back in it. We're back in the boy band zone. I think that was kind of a breakthrough in being like all these things can coexist at once.
Yeah. Well, to get back to the song, something that I did not know until we started preparing for this episode, very interestingly, it's like a rewriting of a previous song by a folk duo called Curtis Muldoon from like the early 70s. Their song Seraphim, which she essentially uses the lyrics for, adjusts the lyrics for, and then writes a totally new song with, which is such an interesting and weird thing. Well, one, I think it fits this kind of spiritual meditative quality that she's building in this song, but it's also really interesting compositionally to hear the differences of how they set the text and how she sets the text and like what she chooses to like pull out and say, oh, this is going to be a massive chorus, like this is a hook, this lyric, where it's not in the original,
And I feel like I've
I feel like Madonna, obviously, the focus on her so much is the kind of the shock factor and the performance and like her as like a figurehead in pop music. But like her as a writer is just like so brilliant. Like she's like such a brilliant mind for like how she thinks of music and thinks of like how to place herself in music and at different times, like thinking about the way that she placed herself at the center of this dance movement that's happening in the 90s, kind of this like late 90s like shift in how we thought about music and thought about like popular music. And
well, yeah, because you could imagine that, okay, it's 1998, we are at like the peak of this new bubblegum pop boom with Britney and all the Max Martin, the Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, etc. And she could have, as like a artist who's in like the second decade of her career, said like, okay, I'm gonna do that, right? I'm gonna like chase what's popular. But instead she does, I mean, stuff that is popular, but it's sort of, a little left of center, and it becomes this massive hit because it's just so good, Whereas like if she was chasing the trend, it maybe wouldn't have worked.
Just like thinking of everything that's happening around it, it's like new metal is like rising and a little weird, kitschy, like one hit wonder type of pop music, like Aqua's like Barbie Girl, and also like all these like weird kind of like one-off hits. And it's just like so funny what was happening, and to make like just like a really euphoric dance song that is still so Madonna and still like within and against the grain. Like it's like such a surreal kind of balance for her.
Yeah, and the production is so amazing. Everything, the sort of constantly pulsing and oscillating and panning synth sounds and the sort of arpeggiated bass, and I also really love like the guitar, like the electric guitar gives it this much more like, not to fall into the trap that we were just talking about, but this kind of like authenticity, or this like, it's like such a real sound. And just everything about it, it feels like it's constantly almost falling apart and almost falling off the rails. But at the same time, this steadiness or this meditative quality, like you were talking about, like you could listen to this for 48 hours straight, right? It just like has that sort of hypnotic quality, but it also feels so chaotic.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, it's so hypnotic. And like, even like her voice, like the way that she's starting to sing And I Feel towards the end, and like it just like gets like increasingly more like frazzled and like frenzied and all of that. Like I love that so much. Like it's just like such a good move. Like it just I like love that entire ending. Like it just is really takes you to another world.
Okay, so Brittany, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about this song and so many other things. If people want to find out more about what you're doing and read your writing online, where should they go?
Twitter's falling apart, but like you can follow me on Twitter. Hey Brittany. But probably, I don't know, I post my stuff on Instagram a lot too. So at Brittany Spanos is also a good place to find me.
And are you guys still doing the podcast for Rolling Stone? Don't Let This Flop?
We are starting again soon. We like had been on hiatus when my co-host EJ was on maternity leave, and then we've been reworking it a little bit for new debut. So not yet. They're back episodes people can listen to.
All right. Well, keep an eye out for that, everyone, too. All right. Well, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll talk more soon.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to another episode. In fact, the last episode of season 1 of This Is the Greatest Song I've Ever Heard in My Entire Life. We thank you so much for listening. Whether this was your first episode or you've been checking them out for a long time, we really, really appreciate it. It's been a really fun journey. We've talked to so many amazing people about so many amazing songs. We will be back in September. Until then, you can follow us on social media at Great Song Pod. That's GR8 Song Pod on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. We're going to continue to be posting new content there all the time until we come back with new episodes. Huge shout out to Catherine and Izzy, who helped me co-produce the show, to Skylar Spence, who's been letting us use his song Kratos in Love as our theme music, and to you, the listener. Thanks so much.